want to say welcome to our program, Singing in a Strange Land. I am Pastor Roland Stringfellow, and we're so very grateful to have a fantastic lineup of individuals. So I wanted to let you know at the offset of our program that everyone is muted. You will not be able to unmute yourselves. And as you see on the screen, we're going to ask for you to keep your cameras turned off for the duration of our program. The panelists, you'll be able to see them, but we're going to be watching a film soon, and we have found that when everyone turns off their video, the bandwidth seems to work better and it doesn't slow down. So we want to make sure that you keep your cameras off for the duration of our program. So I want to first say thank you to all of our co-sponsors for this program this evening: the Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies in Religion at the Pacific School of Religion. We have the Ruth Ellis Center here in Detroit, LGBT Detroit. We also have, let's get these people on the way. Okay, Inclusive Justice, and that is here in Michigan. It's a statewide coalition of congregations that welcome LGBT individuals, and the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, and that is led by Bishop Yvette Flunder. And so again, we're very grateful to have their co-sponsorship with us this evening. So in the chat room, we're going to ask you to please give a shout out where you're from. Recognize we have folks who are from all over the United States who are joining us. So be sure to just let us know where you're from so we can give you that acknowledgement as well. And I want to begin our evening with a quote from the sister, the mother of being at the intersections, and that is Audre Lorde. And her quote reads as such: "Tell them about how you're never really a whole person if you remain silent. Because there's always that one little piece inside that wants to be spoken out. And if you keep ignoring it, it gets madder and madder and hotter and hotter. And if you don't speak it out, one day it will just up and punch you in the mouth from the inside." I wanted to begin our time because when it comes to what is this program all about, living at the intersections, and you see the word cloud that is there, and you can see all the various words that we will take on ourselves to identify who we are. But some of these are labels that other people give to us that are unfair, that is hurtful, that cause all types of violence. We recognize that we are in a movement moment as we are focusing on racial justice in ways that this nation has not seen before. Many of us would not have believed we would have seen even the slight little bit of change we've had already. And we're very interested in seeing where this goes. But for those of us who identify as LGBTQ, oftentimes we won't raise our voices because it's safer to go along to get along, to remain silent, to remain in the shadows, so we can keep our families, we can keep our communities, we can keep our churches, sometimes keep our very lives. And so tonight's program is to highlight those various places which people hide, people tend to remain quiet, and to bring out from the shadows so people can see our beautiful and wonderful selves. Lastly, I want to dedicate this program today in honor of all the Black trans sisters who have had the courage to come out, to live as their authentic selves, oftentimes not being able to pass, and more times than what we want to acknowledge, take the brunt of the violence and the hatred so many people have. But how is it that we can find our pride even in the midst of being at the intersections, living at the intersections? So without further ado, I want to take the time to introduce to you our panelists. And I want to talk to you about how I got to meet each and every one of them. I first want to begin with my dear sister, Reverend Ann Jefferson. And Reverend Ann is a pastor at the City of Refuge United Church of Christ in Oakland, California, as well as working at the Pacific School of Religion, and is the campus minister there, or director of campus life, excuse me, director of campus life. And when I was a seminarian student at Pacific School of Religion, she was one of the people who was there to greet me, take me under her wings, and again, just loved on me when I was so far away from home. And I'm just so very grateful to have her. You're going to see and hear Reverend Ann in the film that we're going to be showing momentarily. Next is the Reverend Monica Joy Cross. And I also met her at the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. Reverend Monica is a pastor with the Disciples of Christ and in Oakland, California. And she's also a deputy with the Poor People's Campaign. If I got that incorrect, Reverend Monica, hopefully you will correct me. And Reverend Monica is somebody who taught me about being trans in ways that I've never experienced before. I was awfully learned. I could read out of a book, but she took the time to let me know about the shoes in which she walked in. And for that, I'm just very, very grateful. The next person I want to introduce is Pamela Alexander. She is the deputy director at the Ruth Ellis Center. And Pamela, when I moved to Detroit, was one of the first individuals who I met. And talk about someone taking you under their wing. And she took me out for coffee, and she talked to me about the Detroit Regional LGBT Chamber of Commerce, and talked about her vision to see an LGBT district here in the city of Detroit, and invited me to say, if you believe in this, come and join us. And that invitation I have always have appreciated, because that helped me get into the circles here in the Detroit area. My dear brother, Curtis Lipscomb, is actually the person on the panel who I've known the longest. He is the executive director at LGBT Detroit, and he is someone who we met at the Creating Change conference, well over a decade ago. I think it was in the year either 2002 or 2003. And we had a instant kinship, brotherhood, and many years later, here we are living in the same city and fighting for the same thing. So I'm just so very grateful to call him my brother. Last but certainly not least, we have Doug Spearman, who is an actor and has done many great works. Many of you may know him best by his role on Noah's Ark, who played Chance. And so one of the things that Doug, as well as his other colleague actors, we invited them to Oakland, California for a town hall meeting, which you're going to see clips of in the film we're going to show you. And I remember when they all got out of their cars and they looked at me and they had this puzzled look, because all they knew was a Reverend Stringfellow was organizing this event. And I'm sure they had conjured up old English white gentlemen in their minds. And then here I come walking out. And so again, we have maintained a connection all these years that goes back to the year 2008. And again, I'm so very grateful to have each of them with us here tonight. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Metropolitan Community Church of Detroit, I'm Pastor Roland Stringfellow, and I'm the senior pastor here. And again, we're so very honored to have you. I want to begin with an opening question for each of our panelists. And Doug, I want to begin with you first. And so everyone is being asked if they think this moment we're in for social change is real and is going to produce lasting change. What do you think? Do you think this movement moment we're in is real and is going to produce lasting change?
First of all, thanks for having me. Welcome to my brand new and completely empty apartment in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I now live. So sorry about like all the empty space behind me. I'm trying to like disguise that. Do I think this is lasting change? Yeah, actually I do. I know something is happening. I was born and raised in Washington in the early 1960s. And so seeing this kind of civil unrest and fight for justice is not something new for me. But the thing that I have hope for is that I see coalitions happening. I see more than just the Black community suffering and feeling it and involved in it. So yeah, I do have hope. I do see some change.
Thank you so much. Curtis, what about you? You are at the middle of many, many movements, and I know you've seen a lot of change. What about this particular one that we find ourselves in now?
Again, thank you for having me. I'm honored. Yes, I do believe that this is real change, and I do believe it's lasting. And I think one of the main reasons why I say yes to both is that technology plays a major role in how people are receiving information and how they are responding to their desires for change. Technology has always been a major part of change in the 20th century, but in the 21st century, in the digital age, you have information that's tailor-made to different populations. And so you'll have change that'll be great for some, but there's also going to be another kind of change when the pendulum swings back. And so there will be change, and it will be lasting. Will it be the change that you desire? Is that the one that you're going to receive? Or are you going to be prepared to get a change that you may not welcome? So I'm concerned about that, but it is lasting, and a change is here, and it's now.
Fantastic, thank you. Pamela, how would you answer that question?
You know, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel, and I'm going to piggyback on what Curtis, because he just, you know, the answer that he gave is exactly what I was going to speak about. For me, it is definitely a change. This brings about inclusiveness. There's, you know, all races, generations, and intersectionalities. This is real, meaning that it's going to be lasting and long term because of the generations that are out here now protesting. Mm-hmm. And they're using tools, the technology that's available to push forth a message as to what they want for themselves and for the future of America. So yes, I believe technology, the way young people are using it and connected it, I mean, they can bring together thousands of people in a couple of hours to protest, you know, so I think that without a doubt, change is here, is going to continue to move in the right direction and make a difference in the lives of all of us here in America.
Thank you so much. Reverend Monica, how would you respond to that question? Is this moment, that movement moment we're in, is it real, is it lasting, will it create lasting change?
It is real change, particularly with the inclusion of transgender people, particularly Black trans women as part of the movement and have a voice in the movement. That's different. It's a much more diverse coalition of folks making change. My question becomes the sustainability, which comes into legislation. That's kind of where I am. So the movement is great. My question is, how will it be sustained? And we have political movement to make that lasting. That's, yeah. Mm-hmm. But thank you again. I'm an organizer in Fort Worth for our region, not the deputy.
Thank you so much for that. I knew I kind of got a little twisted, so thank you for that.
You're good.
Reverend Ann, Ms. Ann, as we love to call her.
Yes. So I have, Yeah, I thought my video was started. Hold on a second. So can you see me and hear me?
Your video looks like it's on.
Okay.
Well, go ahead. Your video is still
Well,
up.
let me just talk. First of all, thank you again for inviting me to be a part of such a wonderful panel of conversationalists and those who are doing this work in the world. I'm really very honored to be a part of that. So I have two answers. The first answer is very short, and that answer is yes, if. So the second answer, I wrote out that what I think makes this movement different is that there's a confluence of what I would call intersectional rage, which will not easily be or quickly be extinguished. But there has to be an equal confluence of strategic thinking, mass organizing, comprehensive civic engagement, and collective power building to sustain the change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. So many of you who have joined us, I'm sure many of you have participated in the marches and have been a part of this movement moment yourself. And you might even wonder, why are we doing this particular event? Because Black queer people are at the center of the Black Lives Matter movement. But for many of us who identify as LGBTQ, same gender loving, queer, questioning, that there is that silent cloud that sometimes hangs over our head, and that is religious bigotry. And it's because of what religious leaders oftentimes have done and have misinterpreted and misappropriated scriptures, and something that I like to call commit spiritual violence. And all that means is that anything that is harmful in the name of God or in the name of the church that would condemn or shun individuals is something that, again, has scarred so many people for such a long time. So this will be a very unique conversation, because not only are we going to be talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, the Black Trans Lives movement, there are various intersections, but particularly that at that intersection of religion and faith. Recognizing many people have done away with the church because it has done nothing for them. And so this is not about proselytizing to talk about how good God is, but God is good, I believe. But what we're going to be doing and talking about today is how the church in particular has impacted our own self-identity and the identities of others who live at the intersection. The film you're about to watch, you won't see it in its entirety. It's an abbreviated version of it. It's called Unity in the Community, and it was filmed back in the year 2008 when we were still fighting for marriage equality. And so the same intersection we're talking about today, we talked about then. Mm-hmm. Doug and his colleagues from Noah's Ark participated. Reverend Ann was filmed a little bit later, and it was filmed at the First Congregational Church of Oakland in downtown Oakland, California, where I later became a staff pastor. And so you'll see me a little bit thinner than what you see right now. And in fact, I think many of us were thinner, quite back then. But the message still resonates today. And it's going to be the foundation of our conversation. As I mentioned, if you are joined us and you have not turned off the video, please make sure that you turn off your video. That also goes for our panelists at this time as well, because it'll help with the bandwidth so you can see the film, hopefully without it dragging or slowing down. After the video, we're going to invite our panelists to turn back on, and then we're going to engage in a conversation that I believe you'll find quite edifying for this movement moment that we find ourselves in. You can find this video in its entirety, as well as a curriculum, as well as other curriculums at clgs.org, and you'll see that web address coming up soon. The Center for LGBTQ and Gender Studies in Religion at the Pacific School of Religion. We have a variety of resources for you if you are wanting to find answers to questions and how to teach this to other people. Well, I invite you to visit us there for that. So without further ado, we're going to play and show you Unity in the Community. How do you answer someone who says, I know that I'm gay, and the Bible says that it's a sin, but everyone sins? Why pick on me when you should pull the plank out of your own eye and look after your own sin? So whatever happened to hate the sin, but love the sinner?
So when we talk about sexuality, we can't talk about sexuality without talking about racism and classism and homophobia and ecological abuse and disparities in income and all of that. So I want to say that I think that we have to create an alternative world. And one of the things so I would say to that person, let's move away from arguing about the plank in this person's eye or the plank in another person's eye and talk about what it might look like to create an alternative reality. Why do we want to do that? First, because we don't want to turn in on ourselves and be sucking in our own dirty air. That's the first thing. Secondly, we need to divest and take the lead in divesting from unjust systems. You know, another piece is that we need to refuse to create and demonize other people. In the name of Jesus, refuse to demonize other people. Part of what it means to be human is to lay down our weapons, to learn to live in the real messiness of life, everyday life, without the protection of weapons, to be in solidarity with other people across all kinds of lines without the protection of weapons.
We have a great love of Scripture and high regard for it in many cases because it became our tool of liberation. It was, in this country, the first book and the only book that many African Americans were allowed to read. And so as we read it, we began to do our own interpretation of the scriptures, the very scriptures that were used to oppress us. We found other scripture and other messages that said that God decreed justice and liberty and fairness and compassion for all people. So the Bible actually became a strong tool of liberation for us in this country.
They understood the theology of the colonialist. They understood the theology of the slaveholder, that you are less than human, that you are repulsive to God, but they instinctually and spiritually knew that God loves me for who I am. And under the penalty of death, under the threat of death, I will hold and create a new theology that says that I am made in the image and likeness of God.
I think one of the biggest things we can do is teach. We could teach the Bible the way the Bible should be taught, as a historical document that is sacred to all of us, but that is nevertheless a historical document that has application as we apply it as best we can discern it, given our historical context. We have to teach.
in the list of all of the things that are unacceptable and things that should not be mixed together, there is a commandment, and you find this often in the prophets, that you are to love the alien among you as yourself, and to remember that you were once aliens and strangers. And so for African Americans, to me this is a very powerful passage, because it says, remember who you were. Remember when you were outside the gate. Remember when you were the oppressed. Remember when you were the strangers. Remember when you were the excluded. And remember to treat those who are the excluded as you would treat yourself.
We have to understand what the moral meaning of our own identities is, right? Where does the personal become political? And where do we move beyond simply affinity, what we have a particular affinity for, and start saying, again, this is an overarching structure of domination, and we have to connect. What does my being a lesbian have to do with the fact that in parts of South Africa, the AIDS rate is 70%? What does it have to do with the fact that with the democratization of public education in Oakland? What does it have to do with affordable housing? What does it have to do with people who are suffering in Palestine? What does it have to do with the wars that are going on in our world? What does it have to do?
You have to fight the system of oppression. And as long as you are going to try to say that one kind of oppression is okay, you're not ever going to be able to fight the system of oppression.
African Americans have been marginalized, and much of African Americans' responses about African American sexuality has been that African Americans have uncontrollable sexual desires, that they are animalistic, and there's been a lot of perversion that's been applied to African American sexuality and African American bodies.
To depict the normalization of that relationship, of the three of them making a family, I thought was incredibly revolutionary. Because I thought, for us to live our lives as if everything we do is completely normal and mainstream is revolutionary. To act as if it's okay and to teach people it's okay by our example is revolutionary. It's sort of a quiet, sort of Gandhi, Martin Luther King way of, it's very nonviolent, you know? And we were like, you know, part of my job was tucking her into a car seat, or there's scenes of me putting her to bed and reading to her and fighting with her, and like, and that all of us having dinner and doing stuff together. And you never see that kind of normal domesticity about gay relationships.
I think it goes beyond just gay and straight as well. I think as black men, we're portrayed in society as being violent, and even bigger than that, being violent towards each other. And so, and I don't know if I'm taking it out of context, but I think to show, black men loving other black men, as the statement said, is the revolution, because we are not animals. We are not all violent.
There is a sense somehow that any kind of aberrant sexual behavior is not something that belongs to black people, that is not a part of our nature. It's the reason I believe that we did not really rise to arms in the early stages of the AIDS epidemic, because we considered homosexuality to be something that belonged outside of our community, that was a practice that was not a part of our behavior. The rise of HIV and AIDS infections in our community, particularly among heterosexual women, is something that is associated with rampant bisexual or homosexual behavior in our communities. This is not necessarily the case, but we've taken this on, and we even see that image perpetrated in many of the movies and the things that we see in the media. This is lifted up, and therefore it's something else that causes people to direct hatred toward persons who are bisexual or transgendered or same-gender loving people. Again, it's all about what will cause us to survive, and a sense that somehow those who are same-gender loving people or transgendered people represent a threat to us as a people.
I think, though, that this show's not so much about sex, and this movie's not about sex. It's about relationships. It's about friendships. It's about love. And if that's not at home in the church, I don't know what is. We're supposed to We're supposed to take pride in ourselves and in the people that we love and the love we have for each other. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with talking about that in church. I think that that is absolutely at home here.
I don't know what we're scared of so much, but the fear, the irrational fear in the Black church about homosexuality is something that we have got to begin to address. And I think that the only way we can begin to address it is to talk about sex in church. Yes. To talk about sex, to begin to talk about things that we didn't want to talk about before. And so I'm here talking about it, trying to say, look, I'm willing to take the risk. It's that important that we sound the trumpet, that I'm willing to put myself on the line, having just been elected. And I think that's what we need to see happening in Black churches everywhere. I think we need to stop lying to ourselves, because what's happening is that we have hurting people, hurting gay people, hurting straight people, hurting bi people, hurting poor people, hurting rich people, suffering, and we're doing all these categories that say your hurt doesn't matter because you caused your hurt, because you chose that stupid relationship, when we don't say that for everybody else who chooses a stupid relationship. So I think we just have to begin to really start looking as best we can at people and the struggles people are going through. And that has to be our lens.
James Bowen said that we take what is bullwhipping us, what is beating us, what is pressing us down, what is subjugating us. We take that pain and we use that to connect to everyone else alive. See? And so we have to begin to build coalitions across issues. Multi-coalition buildings.
The liberation of LGBT people is inextricably linked to the liberation of women, the liberation of poor people, the liberation of people without access to health care. Liberation means that everyone has the right, the ability to be free. And when we come into that knowledge, there's something about that is transformative. And I really do believe that is what is happening right now.
It will take every one of us to address and solve the kinds of challenges that we are facing as a community today, and to heal our communities. It's time for us to not turn on each other, but to turn toward each other, to find the solutions that we need to bring healing to our lives and to our communities, our churches, and our world.
As people develop relationships with those who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered, that will begin the transformation. Because it is in relationship that we begin to really look at scripture and tradition.
The other thing we have to do is to support those ministers who do come out and are supportive of our issues. Yes. Because quite often we isolate them and they get burned out and they don't have the support from their congregations to continue to do what they want to do and they're called to do.
The hope that I hold out is that we will wake up and realize that we are family. We are all in this together. We are God's family. And that we would reclaim those who we have harmed.
When the love for ourselves overflows, it is hard to be ashamed of yourself when you know that God's posture is not this, but this. Perfect love is the difference between breathing and suffocating. Perfect love is the difference between living in color or living life with shades of gray. Perfect love is the difference between feeling the soft grass with your bare feet or wearing shoes that are too tight. Perfect love is the difference between life and death. Yes, we must work to fight for equality for all people and not allow others to take what belongs to us.
God does not love you in spite of who you are, but God loves you exactly because of who you are.
Welcome back, everyone. What I invite you to do now is to ask your questions in the chat, and we will get to those later in our program. And at this point, I would like to call back our panelists. So you can go ahead and, I believe, turn on your videos. And if not, if you're not able to, we'll get someone to help you. Michael will help you. And so, Reverend Ann, you were featured quite prominently in this. And so I want to begin with you. So I would like you to share a challenging time you've had at the intersections of your multiple identities and how you responded either positively or negatively.
So, wow, it was quite something to look back at the film and see the locks and another time and imagine what was going on at that time. Brought back a lot of memories. Thank you for being a part of that. When I thought about this question, what came to my mind was I went back to 1991. I was a youth minister and musician at a Baptist church in Marin City. Belonged to a community that I loved very deeply and was loved by deeply, but was also going through personal transformations and really opening up into the understanding of my own sexuality. And I had entered into my first same-gender loving relationship, but I knew that I was in a setting that where that did not fit. So I really had a choice to make. You know, I was raised in the Midwest in Columbia, Missouri, in a Baptist church, belonged to a Baptist church. Baptist is all I knew, right? So that is as much of my identity as who I was perceiving myself to become, and as an African-American woman. And I made a choice to go into a self-imposed exile. Now, I say that because I resigned from that church after having conversation with my pastor about the process that I was in, where I did not know what the outcome was going to be, but I wanted to be, I did not want to be out of sync with what I knew were the policies and the practices of that congregation. So I made a choice to go into exile. That's what I call it. And I think that that is something that so many of us experience in our place. That was a painful choice. And I didn't go into exile making a big proclamation to everyone. Sometimes exile is the same as hiding. But I'm so thankful for a faithful God who guided me through exile into the City of Refuge, United Church of Christ, where I started attending later in that year, and found a home where I could rest, where I could grow, where I could become. I would say that I made strategic choices vocationally, and I'll say both guided, and I said yes to places to work where I could be fully me. Now, that was not always easy, or was that always the case moving as a musician? You know, you have to pay attention to where you're going, what will sustain your livelihood. So I have not always made choices that, you know, would have me waving a rainbow flag, you know, but I would always talk to key people to try to say, this is who I am now. If, you know, if that's going to be problematic in my serving, then we should come to that. And so I think that this journey of exile, it takes a long time to come out of exile. Some days I think I'm still coming out of exile, even all these many years down the line, even 20 years down the line. So, I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit more, but choosing exile which is where God always meets us, in the desert or in the wilderness. We're never alone, even if we go in to exile. Choosing exile sometimes means saying goodbye to people that we love dearly, means separating ourselves in ways that cause psychic and heart pain. You know, I'm a product of the exile, I'm a product of the wilderness, and I'm glad about it. I'm better for it. But it's not an easy choice.
Thank you so much. Doug, what about you? You're obviously the other person who was featured quite a bit in the film, and what about you, about the intersections of your multiple identities, and maybe you can even identify what some of those would be.
Well, my multiple identities, years of therapy. I'm trying to get them down to one. I'm just trying to get down to Doug, and that's important to me, because part of what I do for a living is pretend to be other people, and then have to discover the lives that fill up that character. If you look at if you get an email from me, there's under my signature, it says Doug Spearman, and this is actor, writer, producer, activist. And, the thing that, the two words that I leave off of that would be Black and then gay, and then all of that other stuff, because of the way I was raised and the time in which we live and have lived, Black always is a thing. Like, I am always a Black man. And in the last month, I don't think I've ever been more visible as a Black man, and have it my color and the culture that created me is such an object of, and such an object of conversation before. I mean, it's a little overwhelming. I want to say a couple things. First of all, I have to really, and I do this a lot, I really praise my parents for the things that they did right. And the two things that my parents did not screw up for me were God and sex. My dad's stepfather, who I knew as my biological, as my grandfather, but he was my dad's stepfather, was a Pentecostal minister in New York. And I would get sent to New York every summer to stay in Brooklyn with my grandparents. And when you have a lot of cousins and you have a minister for a grandfather, you were handed the Bible and you were told you're going to be in church a lot. So I spent a lot of time, like Wednesdays, Saturdays, Sundays, in Pentecostal churches in New York. And we were made to memorize the Bible. Some of which I remember, some of which I don't. But I always thought it was very interesting that my grandmother did not go. My grandmother went to a huge Baptist church, huge, which had been a big vaudeville theater. And it felt more like theater than it did about faith for me. So that was always very confusing, because I also looked at the life of my grandfather, the minister, Reverend Walker. Everybody called him Reverend Walker. And he was a complicated man. He had very, very, very serious issues that impacted not only him, my grandmother, but me, seriously, physically. And I always had a respect for the church and and ministry and people who feel called to it. But I was brought up by my mom, who got sober when I was 14, after a long relationship with bourbon that seemed to be more important than a relationship with us. So when my mom got sober, she called me into her bedroom one night and she said, your father and your relationship with God is the most important relationship you'll ever have. And your father and I, and nobody in this family can create that for you. So it's up to you to create that relationship. And you're going to start next Sunday. So find the church and go there. And you know, my mother's sobriety had a lot to do with her own spiritual awakening, and she got involved with the church, but she didn't make me go. She asked me if I wanted to go, and sometimes I did. So I really got to seek, and I really got to read, and I really got to go, and I got to look. And it's a constant journey for me. So because I was given boundaries bigger than the traditional Black church, sometimes I come into conflict with that because I never fostered a strong interpersonal relationship with that. So I have a relationship with God, and I have a relationship with, I have a spirituality, and I have a practice. And I'm also 19 years sober. And because I'm in AA, it's a spiritual program. So, you know, I have to do things every day to keep myself spiritually fit. The conflicts come with trying to understand people who weren't raised the way that I was, just as it would be for somebody who wasn't raised the way I was. And I look for the similarities and not the differences. I know that being Black in this country, being a Black man in this country has always been something that was right here for me. You know what I mean? Like I could never been able to get away from it. And I've had to learn to accept it. And I know that being Black and gay in this country has really done a number on me. You know what I mean? Sometimes I would ask myself, like, why did I have to have all of those like at one time? Couldn't I have had one or, Black, gay, 5'9"? It's had more of an effect on my career than it has on my life. I mean, I know a lot of people know me from the work that I did on Noah's Ark. But that was sort of halfway through a career that had been going on for decades longer than that show. And I found it very interesting the way that being a gay man is looked at in both the Black community and in the greater perspective of Hollywood. And, you know, at the time Noah's Ark first started, I was the first one that was out of the closet. And so I was the one that was on magazine covers first and very visible, because I wasn't gonna pretend not to be something that I was in order just to maintain the show on air. And, you know, it was amazing. And I was listening to what I said in the documentary, and why I did the show was exactly what I meant. It was the fact that I saw two Black men raising a child, and I'd never seen that before in my life. And I thought, if I get to do that, that will be a huge milestone. But the flip side of that is the fact that we as Black gay men aren't necessarily honored in the world, or weren't, and certainly not necessarily in Hollywood. It's not, you know, there aren't a lot of Chance and Eddie's, the two characters from Noah's Ark. I couldn't get a job for 6 years, 7 years, because of the show, because of the perceptions of the show and the perceptions of me. Because when people see you on television, they think that's who you are, and that's all of who you are. And I'm a lot bigger than that. So I spent a lot of time just trying to prove that I am bigger than other people's expectations of me. I hope that answers the question.
I muted myself. I said, wow. And I have a lot of follow-up questions, but we're going to move on to our other work. Pamela.
Yes.
You have been a sage in this community for such a long time, as I reflected in my introduction of you and your role at the Ruth Ellis Center. And congratulations, and you are now entering into retirement. And
yes.
Fantastic. And so I'm curious how you respond to this question, because you have had many roles, many jobs, many communities that you've been a part of. So what about a challenging time at the multiple identities that you've had?
The one story that comes to mind that has really framed the way I somewhat see the world. When I was 20, And so I'm probably older than most folks on the panel here. This would have been the late, the mid 70s. I was 20. Had just finished college, had been promised, I was working in retail. I was going to be promoted to a assistant manager's position. And right there at the time that I went to CHR, they told me, well, Pamela, we really like your work and we're going to make sure you have the wages, but we just can't promote you because you're colored. That's what I was told. And being 20 and it's the 70s, it hurt, it shocked. You know, it shocked me that, first of all, someone would say something like this to me. Someone actually believed that I wasn't good enough to run a department in a retail store, simply because of the color of my skin. And for me as a young person, that really framed my view of how I knew that I was going to have to learn more and do more, because I simply didn't have the skills. I didn't know how to channel my energy to address that. I didn't know the laws, I didn't know the rules, I didn't know how to navigate, but I knew one thing, I was filled with anger and pain. So needless to say, I quit the job and I moved on. But I never forgot the experience, what that person left me with. And so as time went on, I continued to, learn more about, how things worked in our system related to employment and navigating systems and so forth, to the extent that I began to focus on laws and policies at the state and federal level. Moving forward on into my life, of course, at that time I was married, and then of course I came out much later in my life, in my late 30s, and this is a new identity, a part of my intersectionality that I will need to address now. I've learned as much as I can. I became an activist because of that. I became a staunch believer in women's rights because of that, because of being more empowered to speak up on behalf of Black people in general, but certainly for myself. And then I came out in my late 30s, which was another level of my identity. And throughout my career, I've had those challenges related to race. I've had those challenges related to being a woman, being the only woman at the table. I've had those challenges because once I came out as a lesbian, I'm not going to hide my identity. I had no reason to do that. I had empowered myself to be strong and to maintain my convictions as my truth. So for me, being at the table, being Black, being a woman, and being a lesbian, there were those who just simply it was a lot to handle, okay? But for others, but not for me. So I live in my truth. I live every day of my life to believe that I need to model this behavior that I believe so strongly in to young people, to become their best advocate for themselves. Did it change me? Yes, it did. Did it make it uncomfortable for me? Yes, it did. But it taught me lessons to go out and to be at the table, to when you have a position, stand by that position. When it comes to race, the laws are what they are. I didn't know what they were then. I do now. And so for me, if I had become an attorney, I certainly would have followed through the law, followed up on the law that deals with constitutional rights. So for me, that was a life lesson for me. And here I am, at retirement, and I can honestly say at 20, I just didn't know enough. And now that I'm in my mid 60s, I know a whole lot more. And it's because I took on that challenge. And there is no one that can ever disallow me my rights as a citizen in this country because of my race. That is intolerable as a woman. It's unacceptable as a lesbian. We're going to fight. We're going to fight to the finish if need be. And I take a very, very strong position on that. I do.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Reverend Monica, in the film, we were talking about the normalizations of LGBTQ relationships. And generally you got people who fall into one or two categories. Either they are a fight for integration and recognition, or they're just kind of stay out of my business, as I stay out of yours. So in your coming out and integration, which category did you fall? We know where you are now, but how did you begin?
Well, I kind of queer the categories. Yeah, I mean, so I was in the Navy for 22 years. So being in the Navy and those last years, having my own come to Jesus moment in a sense, it really alerted me to the indoctrination that I was in and the need to liberate myself first from the indoctrination. It took a lot of work to do that, a lot of work. And having to really navigate what it meant to be a federal government military worker at the same time knowing that I'm trans at the same time. We're talking, I'm at sea 6 months at a time on a ship full of men. So, and of course, when I would come into port, I would go to a gay club, queer club, have a good time. So it was a matter of navigating what it meant to be a human being, particularly in the Bible Belt, Norfolk, Virginia, where the Naval Investigative Service was always around. But it's like, and then of course, I had gone to New Life MCC, because that was the first church I came to. And I mean, it was so empowering. So I'm going through this stuff to have a church like New Life that was right there. It was a wonderful experience. And then to encounter the police at the same time. But a lot of this came because the more I got into my relationship with God, the more I was able to overcome these different challenges that were taking place. I still remember I had come from church. I was driving my car and the police stopped me right there. I had nothing, I was just driving. I don't know, because I was black, because I was a black man, black trans. I mean, I had to pick the category. Fortunately, they made me get out of the car. They didn't bother me, but they definitely gave me a hard time. Probably because that's in Pat Robertson's area, so he controls that area religiously. It was a really frightening experience. But the only thing that really got through to me was my relationship with God, my faith, and what I learned also in that space. So after looking at the complications of what you call a slaveholder's religion area, I want to go into a Wiccan therapist to get over this stuff. I got mad love for Wiccans and Wiccas and anybody because I don't think I could have made it through the complications of white supremacy without my Wiccan therapist. So what it let me know is that God moves and thrives and functions beyond just the church. The church is one component of what God is doing, but Native American, they have their spirituality, you got the Buddhist. So I came to a very different conversation as I was engaging these different oppressive systems. But I'll close one final time. I had a top secret clearance as the chief petty officer in the Navy. I was working in headquarters, right? And it came up that I had to be recertified for my top secret clearance. I know everybody knows what a top secret clearance is or not, but it's like way up there in the stratosphere, classified information. And I just prayed to God, say, okay, God, look, this is tough. Okay, so what are you gonna help me out? And I was told, just trust me, I got you. So the lady comes in and we're in the office and she is going over my file. Everybody on my list was trans. Everybody, all the witnesses, everybody on my form. And she says, don't worry. I had a cousin who just had the surgery already. Mm-hmm. So it let me know that God is definitely engaged and involved in what we're going through. It doesn't negate the idiocy in those oppressive systems. But what it does say is that once you receive the hospitality of God, there's nothing that can stop you. I would have never met Pastor Ann. Pastor Ann wasn't for that. Yeah.
Indeed. And Curtis, how would you also describe yourself? Because when I think of activists, you definitely come to mind. And so, in your own particular journey, were you always been this fight for integration, recognition kind of person as you are now, or kind of stay out of my business and let's go along to get along?
I looked at that question and I underlined stay out of my business and I will stay out of yours, because I truly identify and press for freedoms. I think that a person has the right to walk on earth as they see fit. But I do also recognize that I don't live on an island. I never lived on an island. My friend Eddie Cummins, who I grew up with since I was 14 years old, he said to me in recent years, he said, I knew that you were trained to go into the arts, but I knew that this was your work. And I said to Eddie, now Eddie said it a little bit more colorfully than I did. But Eddie said that, and I said to him, well, Eddie, what do you mean by that? He goes, Curtis, you were always organizing in high school. And I knew I wanted safe spaces in high school, and I knew that I had to get that and organize that that was something that I wanted to be a part of. And when I look back, I thought maybe Eddie was right. When I'm from Detroit, and I came out when I was 15 years old in 1980. But prior to that, I always knew I was attracted to the same gender. So liking boys as a boy myself, that wasn't unusual for me. It felt natural. I also had the luxury to celebrate that when I was young. I don't think I was necessarily a flag-waving gay, but I truly wasn't a straight boy. I was surrounded in high school by people who knew my identity as I came out at 15, and I had the fortune not to hide. And so I walked on earth as comfortable as I could. I live in Detroit, which is a social conservative city, middle of America kind of place, and I walked that walk, and I was fine until I moved to New York. I got an opportunity to go to this great school in New York, and the identity that I primarily had as being a Black boy from Detroit, it changed. Being Curtis Lipscomb in Detroit, it changed when I moved to New York as being this gay Black boy from the projects of Chicago. So this identity that came to me was a perception that East Coast residents had of me, and I had to figure out, so what did that mean? I also stepped into New York at a time when the celebrated gay community was a white male dominated space, and it wasn't necessarily uncomfortable for me. I entered the space. I was fine with myself, so being around others wasn't so unique. But I also entered New York at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So what does it mean to be free to express yourself, free to express your attraction, and being at the mecca of the movement during the HIV/AIDS crisis? And so as I walked through doing what I was trained to do, I had a great career, traveling all around the world. I also seen many of my friends die. And I think I was one of many as an accidental activist. Was I an activist in the truest sense of maybe what people identify and say or call that description now? No. But I know as a Midwestern guy, if someone needs help, you help that person. And so many of my friends needed help. Some people who were strangers needed help. And so I saw my friends lose a lot. They lost their senses, they lost their homes, they lost their jobs, and ultimately lost their lives. And it wasn't until when my best friend Robert died in my arms that I thought, okay, so this is what I'm charged to do, charged to honor Robert Pennock and know that there's others like him who've lost their lives, lost their friends, families were grieving and mourning. And I knew from 1992 on that I had another footstep. And so God ordered these steps, and I've been doing that work ever since. And so I identify as an activist because of the multiple decades post my involvement in the movement. But I would say it was truly accidental, or just God ordered my footsteps.
Amen. Amen for that. And what you, listening to you, Curtis, and this is now for the entire panel, what I want to do next is combine our next questions. They have questions. Because listening to you, I think about this movement moment, as I keep calling it, not only the movement for racial justice in the age of COVID, in the age of Trump, and all these various things that just can pull at all of us, no matter how we identify. It is just taxing. It is exhausting. And for those of us prior to all of this, having to deal with so many other challenges, again, living at that intersection, I wonder, how do you care for yourself? Holistic health is so very important, caring for your mind, body, and spirit. So how do you care for yourself in this age of Trump? And one other thing I just want to throw into the mix, because these are the days we're living in. This roller coaster we're on, listening to what the Supreme Court's decision was. I mean, many of us who are activists did not anticipate the decisions on LGBT employment and the DACA. And so it's like, sometimes you're afraid of having hope for it to be dashed again. So my question to anyone, I'm just going to just throw it out, and we'll take two of you or three of you to respond. How do you care for yourself in these challenging times that we find ourselves in?
If I may jump in, thank you for this question. We are upstairs doing a film, and so thank you for this privilege. I am a member of One Church Detroit. One Church Detroit is an LGBT church here led by Pastor Jeffrey Seals. He's a wonderful faith leader, and I'm very proud to follow him. I know that on Sundays, I attend church where, you're gonna love this, though it is LGBT, there's only 3 men in the whole church. I'm one of the 3. And I play the role as church mother. I have my chair, I have my big hat, and I have this kind of presence and this love of sisterhood around me that is so assuring and so welcoming. So one way that I find strength in this roller coaster is to listen to faith leaders, get the word, wrap my arms around people who are more seasoned than me, wrap my arms around younger sisters who are walking this journey, and rest and assured that God has sent the word through them. Pastor Jeffrey Seals, his husband, Antonio Johnson Seals, are great, great men. 2 church mothers, wonderful caretakers. I'm surrounded by greatness. And so through great conversation with friends, wonderful times to reflect with others, a great place where faith can be practiced, the word heard. That's one way that every week at 11 o'clock sharp, that is where I arrive. That's where I get my spiritual meals, and that helps me with the journey as the Trump, COVID-19, the protests, the job loss, the deaths rage on. It is God that's going to sustain us, and I'm so glad He sends angels to us.
Yeah, I'd love to take that question too. The first thing that I would say is that one of the best decisions that I ever made for self-care was to become a member of City of Refuge United Church of Christ under the leadership of Bishop Yvette Flunder. So that home for me, that refuge has really formed and shaped who I am and who I am becoming. That's number one. Number two, Frederick, thinking about the age of Trump and thinking about what's going on right now, Frederick Douglass said that people do not love those who remind them of their sins. So and I'm talking about the sin of white supremacy, the sin of heteropatriarchy, the sins of capitalism, all of those kinds of things. And so that's much of what we're up against. You know, when you think about the spiritual violence that's going on at the forces of spiritual wickedness in high places in Washington, DC, and the Senate, and in all of those places. And so I have to remind myself to do self-care. I'm not very good at it. But Audre Lorde is the one who said that to do self-care is not self-indulgence, but it's self-preservation, and it's also an act of political warfare. So we really have to remind ourselves how essential it is to sustaining ourselves in a time like this. And literally, what I have to do in this age of COVID-19 and with everything that's been going on with the police murders and the murders of trans women, I have to take 3 steps. Sometimes I have to turn away, I have to turn off, and I have to turn within. I have to turn away from the constant barrage of the media, of what's happening to our people in the world that just crushes your heart. It would lead you under a spirit of despair. So I have to turn away. Like, I'll see posts and things. I'm like, I can't look at that, right? Sometimes I have to turn off the news, or I have to turn off the social media. I have to just find something else, or delve into the quotes from do Sankofa moments, go back and fetch the things that sustained our people along the way and think about those things today. And then I'm trying to get better at turning within. So I have to say that this season of quarantine is certainly not my favorite season. I'm a social person. I like to be connected to people. The thing about sheltering in place is that you really have to deal with yourself. What are those places within yourself that need healing, that sometimes we avoid the healing by even our activist work, or by our church work, by our whatever we're doing, by our teaching, whatever it is that we are doing. And so trying to do turning away, turning off, and turning within, so that I can practice these things and strengthen and sustain myself for the long haul.
I just want to reiterate what Reverend Ann just said, because, and also, Roland, you said a word that comes up a lot. It has come up a lot in conversations over the last, and the word is exhaustion. Because I think we've all been dealing with this, not just the last 3 weeks or the last month, but I mean, years and years. And it really got heavy, at least for me, and the endanger feeling as being a Black man once Barack Obama. I remember the conversation I had with my aunt the day after Barack Obama became the presumptive candidate for the Democratic Party. And like, we just were like, when are they going to shoot him? I mean, and then all of a sudden they just started shooting every other black gay man, or every other black man in America, it felt like, and especially the young ones. Yeah, I have to, there was a point when I thought a couple of weeks ago that I was having some kind of break with reality, because it was all too much, and it just felt like this slow train that had started to pick up speed and pick up noise and because we now live in an age where technology is everywhere. It's, you know, when I was a little kid, the TV was the den, and that was where you saw the TV or you heard the car radio. Now we carry this stuff with us all the time, and if we're not carrying it, somebody next to us has got it. So I've had to learn how to turn off, and I also begin my days with meditation, 20 minutes of meditation, 15 minutes of meditation, sometimes twice a day. Because if I don't go in and if I don't get centered, then I can't deal with it. Then I'm always in reaction mode, and I have to learn how to respond. And two other things, and then I'll shut up. One is, in the sober community in which I have lived and thrived, sometimes you are one of two black people in a very white space. It's very welcoming and everybody's there, but you're very aware of that, because this is America and we're black men, and we're aware that's why we have the nod. And one of the things that we have done is create spaces for us as black, gay, sober men to come together and to talk. And because we're in a program that relies on solution more than the problem, we tend to think of the solutions, but we're there for each other. So I've really noticed a coming together of at least in my circle of friends, or just groups of people coming together to talk and just go, are you okay? And the other thing is that I have a lot of white friends, and I have three college. I went to Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana in the 80s. And three of my college roommates are white Republicans. And we have been friends since we were 17. I've known three of these guys, for the bulk of my life. And we have had real conversations, and they have had real questions. And I have brought up stuff that happened, like 40 years ago. And I'm like, we need to talk about this, because I want you to not pass this on to the kids or your children or your grandchildren. This has to stop. And there are times when, over the last month, it has been exhausting. Like the night that the riots happened in Los Angeles, I started getting calls, and I immediately checked on a lot of the black men in my life. But the next day, I started getting calls from all these white men, and a lot of white straight men in my life wanted to know how they could educate themselves, and wanted to know what they could read or what they could see or what they could watch or what it was like for me. And that was the most amazing thing, because it's not always my job, even though I was given the talk when I was a kid that I might be the first black person somebody ever meets, and that I have a responsibility not only to my family but my race. But it's not always my job, and it's not always the energy that I have to answer those questions. But I have to suit up and show up and have those conversations, because if I don't have them, who knows if they'll ever happen. And I'm just glad that somebody finds me a safe enough space to have those conversations in a non-confrontational way. So I encourage white people to ask those questions, but please understand if we're tired. Please understand if sometimes you're not the first conversation we might have that day. And realize that, yeah, we are creating what I'm seeing now is a leveling of the playing field like I never, like true equality across gender, sexual orientation, color, economics. I see it happening, and I'm happy. It's happening in me as well. But I want to have those conversations, but I need to rest. I need to turn off from time to time. I need to, sometimes I'll look at the phone and it's ringing. I'm like, I can't talk to somebody today. I have to take care of myself. Because, you know, like they tell you on an airplane, if you don't put your own oxygen mask on first, you're screwed. You put your mask on and then you help somebody put their mask on. So meditation, anything to do with my sobriety, checking with people, encouraging myself not to overeat, get some exercise, get some fresh air, stay off of Facebook, do not open CNN or even Google News for days at a time. And then when I'm replenished and connected to my source, then I can go out there and be the person that I need to be.
I love that. And in fact, I didn't realize that you went to IU Bloomington. So did I in the 80s. We'll have to talk later. Yeah. But one of the things that you said, Doug, that reminded me, I said something so unpastoral a couple of weeks ago. I was on a Zoom group with everybody, and everyone's checking in with everybody around Black Lives Matter. And I was on a call with predominantly European Americans. And they got to me, and how are you doing? How are you feeling? And I was like, I'm tired of being Mammy Sally for people.
That right there.
I'm tired of caring for people. I'm tired of having to be the Black expert or the magic Negro in the room. Yeah. And I was just, you know, and it just popped out of my mouth. I'm like, afterwards, because again, there's always, not always, but there's sometimes is a backlash for being too uppity or speaking out of turn, or that is not your place, you know, no matter what your education level is and how far you've come, that oftentimes can get back. So you, then in the cleanup woman, you know, whether you're female or not, you know, oftentimes we get put into those roles. I want to ask a question of both Pamela and of Monica around this movement moment again, because you know, we know for certain that the most vulnerable among us are Black trans women. And as I mentioned at the top of this program, that I dedicate this program tonight to all those who we've lost and those who have that constant struggle. And you know, Pamela, you work and support a variety of Black trans women. And so we've all heard this saying that until Black lives matter, no lives matter. But isn't it better to say until Black trans lives matter, no Black life matter?
I support that and I agree to that 100%, absolutely. We know that you know, trans lives are so heavily marginalized in our community, in the broader community, the violence and so forth. But for me, I believe that people need to begin to think beyond, in my opinion, Black lives, because if that's the bar and the challenge is still there against Black trans people's lives, then we have not met our true responsibility, our true destination, and being inclusive to all people. So for me, Black trans lives matter. Everyone else is there, except for this population. So yes, that's the work that I do at the Ruth Ellis Center. I believe that with all my heart and soul. I want to see more of that when I do look at CNN and when I do talk to people in different communities about why they're out there protesting. And for the most part, what I've been receiving from the folks that have been protesting is that that's what they believe, and that's why they're out there. I just need to make sure that that narrative stays at that level. That is what I truly believe.
Fantastic, thank you. Monica, how would you respond to that? You are muted, I believe. Michael, can you help? Or can you unmute yourself, Monica? Oh, almost. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, you know, it's tough because I realize that white discourse still hold authority even in progressive movements. You know, when you look at the funding priorities, when you look at the requirements, when you look at these, they're still, for the most part, adhering to Trump's America. So no matter how progressive a lot of our movements are, as long as it's still an appeal to Donald Trump and his crew, that's the challenge. So I mean, you can't wait. I forget all your lawyers say about the master's tools. We're still using the master's tools, which prevents a serious imagination, serious transformation, so that the transgender community, beyond just Black trans women, but the whole spectrum, can really be valued that even come close to what I want to say. I mean, I know it takes a minute because as long as we're still trying, I still remember a woman in Virginia, Black woman in Virginia, who said, "You're just evil, just plain evil." And then she says, "You know, we have enough on our plate now that have no worry about you and your folks messing up for us, because there's still an appeal to Frantz Fanon's white gaze." So as long as the white discourse holds the conversation, holds the authority, holds the money, it's going to be very difficult. Even with this present moment, we have a lot of trans folks involved in the movement. But my question is, once this is passed, what will happen next? Because the ground of being the ground of the discourse, I just wonder, has it really changed? Now, when we value and accept and embrace and lift up Black trans women, there will really be a change. That will be transformation. You know, I almost think like, I was telling a friend of my mother today, I said, when they put a Black woman on the Supreme Court, things will really have changed. But the question is, you know, for me is, how far are we willing to go to fully embrace transgender women? Yeah, white trans women, yeah, they get all kinds of stuff. But the Black trans women, once you get beyond Laverne Cox and others, are still in a difficult place. So that, for me, that is a challenge, because what you're doing is when you empower the Black trans woman, you're actually decentering white supremacy even more.
Yeah,
I think sometimes it's lost. The issue, we have to decenter white supremacy and white privilege. And I try to do that because as a director of women's ministries in the region, that's what I do. I make a whole lot of folks uncomfortable. But to decenter whiteness and white supremacy, instead of decentering that imagination, that's what it's got to be about. It just can't be about liberating a few or some so you get better jobs and more money. That's not the point. The point is to decenter and deconstruct the narrative of white supremacy. Yeah. And once that's done, then I will feel like, yes, we have really changed. We have really been transformed. But yeah.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
You know, Reverend Rowland.
Yes.
I wanted to speak about this too, because I think about a question that Bishop Flunder raises in her book from now the title is escaping me.
Where
the edge gathers, right? So there's a question that she will often pose, and that is, so if we consider ourselves to be on the margins, then who's on the margins of our margins, right? There are, you know, every group has its marginalized groups. And so the goal is not to move from the margins to the center, or to bring those who are at the margins in the center, but it is to relocate the centers.
Right.
That, again, back to what Reverend Monica said, that the spoke in the wheel doesn't have to be white supremacist, hetero patriarchal thing. No, there are other centers, and some of that movement is happening. And I was going to share my screen about a New York Times article that came out just today that features conversation with Black trans women. Is this an okay time to do that? If I can do that, because another quote from Audre Lorde says that I am not free while any woman is unfree, even if her shackles are very different from my own. So that can apply, but this article came out. It's a beautiful woman, Nala Toussaint is featured, and there are other voices that are raised up talking about Black trans women seeking more space in the movement that they helped start. Sometimes those who generate a movement then get pushed, to the side or pushed outside. So I really encourage everyone to get to the New York Times, take a look at this. Nala is a minister in training at Rivers Living Water in New York and New Jersey, and a member of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, and has several projects, Girls, Gender Equity, and the Okra Project. So, there is a movement forward, but we have to keep reminding ourselves also of the things that Ella Baker said, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. Sometimes what happens is we become complacent when we think we've made a particular gain. You can never sit down, because there's always going to be pushback against liberation and freedom for all people, but none of us are free until all of us are free, and especially those who are the most marginalized or the most in jeopardy. And so we have to push. We have to push, and not just for inclusion, but really talking about belonging. It's about equity and belonging, because inclusion also suggests that we're the host and we have the invitation. The table has to be created and set by all of us, right? Because we all belong there. So anyway.
Thank you for that. We got some questions from our folks that I want to throw out. And the first one is, how do you push change for greater acceptance in both the Black community as a whole and the church? I know many of us, still have relationships with churches. So how is it that you in particular fight for that type of inclusion, so we won't remain silent or just, sitting in the choir pew and people, in a sense, pimping us for our goods?
Can I ask a question about that question?
Please.
Okay. I'm actually sitting here pulling up Audre Lorde quotes, and they're amazing. And now I have to order some books because I don't know enough about her. But you asked the question about. Ask the question again, because I want to make sure I ask what I asked.
Yes. So how can we fight for better integration or challenge both the Black community and the church?
Okay, so the word you used before was inclusion, not integration. Yes.
Okay.
So my question is why do we need somebody else's acceptance or some group's acceptance of us in order to live our lives as authentically as possible in any space that we inhabit? And there's a phrase that I like. It's to go to the hardware store for Chinese food, and by that I mean you go to a place where you want to get something, but it just doesn't exist in that space for you. So whenever I'm asked this question, I'm like, I don't need anybody's permission to be myself, and I don't necessarily need acceptance. I need community and communion, but I don't need to belong to a group of people that don't necessarily want to have me or hear me. I can show up, I can sit there and I can get the message, but if I'm not going to be welcome in this space, that seems both antithetical to the teachings in the New Testament and to how I choose to live my life. So why would I want to belong to a group that doesn't necessarily want me to belong to it?
Others?
Yeah, I get, yeah, Doug, I got you. So I remember I had a really hard time because and I haven't really talked about this a lot. I had given up on the church because I knew what the church was. And the history of the church, So I had looked at Buddhism and other traditions, and the church kept coming back because I know I socialized. I got that, but why the church? And it's like at some point the church needs to be saved. Like you become the salvation of the church, And I get this a lot from Bishop Flunder and Dorsey Blake and others. The church can't be saved unless you do it. Particularly when you talk about a church that is so off-center. What Jesus are you talking about here? So, because I wasn't going to do it. But part of my call is to go back into the church and save the church, like a lot of other folks are doing. But that's only because my authenticity, the credibility of who I am, is not in the church per se. It's actually in my relationship with God, period. There's no other option. And then being authentic. So this past, a couple of summers ago, I went to Disciples General Assembly in Iowa. And they're trying to pass, they're just trying to pass a resolution to learn about transgender and gender nonconforming people. So, I got up and I was talking, and then all I could think about is my transgender sister who's been murdered over the years. And that's when the spirit took over. And it passed. The resolution passed. But unless we're in those spaces, really grappling with folks who really don't know. Some of them want to know. Some of them want to wake up and don't know how. Unless you're in that space, it's whatever, what is grace for is not to wake people up type of thing. But I'm clear that my authenticity and credit does not lie in the church. It just can't. If it did, I wouldn't do the work I need to do.
So I want to ask a question because I appreciate what you just said, Reverend Monica, and what Doug said as well, and put this out to the other panelists, because I recognize and I see those individuals who the Black church or the church and the Black community is indeed their lifeline, and they can't see themselves being apart from it. And so thus they keep quiet. Again, they go along to get along, because in the curriculum that I wrote called Emoja, there's a chapter that says, that's called Mama in the Church. And there's a gentleman who said, you know what, if mama is not for me being gay, and the church is not for me being gay, I ain't coming out of the closet. And that is so great of a price to pay. So what is your advice, particularly for those individuals who feel like, I can't let go?
Can I jump in?
Please.
I want to say to the point that Doug Spearman brought, I can relate to that politically. I agree in that position wholeheartedly, but I recognize that the church does good work. It has done great work, and it will continue to do good work. One of the things I like to talk about when I have the opportunity is to talk about how the church helped develop the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for Dr. Ocean Sweet. This was a case brought up in the early 20th century where this man who wanted to live in a white community had a white mob around him, and he stood his ground to protect his land. As a result, he shot a white man, and he was then arrested, and with his family, who also shot, was at risk of course, going to jail, but also losing their lives. What the church did at the time, which was really phenomenal, with really dimes, nickels, and pennies, took up a legal defense fund for Dr. Sweet and his family, and hired the most expensive white lawyer that they can get. And then this lawyer used the fact that this Black family needed somebody to advocate strongly for them, and the church and the communities who attended the church and recognized that being the center contributed to that defense fund. When I learned about that case, it's told me a lot about who we were at a time way before my grandparents were alive. But I think of that as a major example of what people who organize around faith can do. And so to that person who believes that that place is a sanctuary for that person, although again, I agree politically that I wouldn't want to be any place, and I'm not going to be any place where I may be harmed by a person on the pulpit. I recognize that there is a truth for you there. And I recognize that that place has probably done some good for your family that I may not know of. Because again, we live in an intersection. That the church could have paid my rent when I needed, could bought food for my child when I needed, could heal my grandmother if she needed it. There are many parts to us. And I know as an out-gay person, this one part needs to be affirmed. And if that isn't as important to another person, I can't shun them, because I do recognize that we have, the church has done some great good and will continue to do great good. It is just based upon who are the people organized around that ministry.
And Roland, I'd like to add to that, Roland, related to like the city of Detroit. It was sometime last fall, I was out in the community, and I decided to reach out to a very conservative Black church in the city of Detroit. And I met with the pastor and several of the deacons, and of course, you know, I'm talking about the services that we provide at the Ruth Ellis Center, that I'd like to be able to provide workshops or training to educate, or to at least have a safe space for young people at the church who identify as LGBTQ for the youth. Well, you know, it was cordial, and so, you know, I left my cards and went on. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from that pastor who wanted to meet with me at our agency. And through that brief conversation, we opened up the lines of communication. And for that reason, I believe that not everything will change all at once, but if you are willing to take the chance, or willing to extend yourself to go out and talk with folks in the community, whether it be a church or an organization or so forth, because that's the work that I do. And so for me, and through that conversation, we've been able to build a relationship. And the pastor was very honest with me. He said, you know, I have young people who identify as, I believe, as gay. I think there's trans people in my congregation, but I don't know how to communicate with them. I don't know
what I can do to support them. I had a young person who wrote a note to their mom and said they were going to kill themselves because they came out as gay, you know, and he said that frightened him, and he called me coming to meet with him God sent, because he had prayed for a way to be able to communicate better with all of his congregation, but particularly for young people and the generations of young people who are there, who are struggling with their identity. So I think just being at the table, being able to outreach and communicate, and that's what's been, I believe, successful for the work that I've been able to do at the Ruth Ellis Center. And I just wanted to share that.
One of the things that that I would really like to say about, you know, as painful as this the pandemic of COVID-19 is, there are many gifts that are coming to us. One of the gifts is that everything is coming undone, which includes the church. Everything as we have known it to be is coming undone. And that means the church is coming undone, which gives us an opportunity. It was spoken about in a panel discussion. Again, Bishop Flunder and others were talking about we're in a devolution revolution, right? That things are devolving. Perhaps we are actually getting back to the heart of what Christ intended. Certainly there wasn't, you know, virtual world, but smaller group gatherings, more attention to relationships, more attention to what brings us hope. There are some things about church that really just need to come undone and be left for it forever. Just, you know, the things that have been harmful to the earth, the things that have been harmful to people, and we have to find new ways to partner. I'm very much invested in, and as is Reverend Monica, the work of the Poor People's Campaign with Bishop Barber, which is breaking down barriers between group and helping us think about what's happening through around issues of class. What's been revealed about all of the gaps and all of the places where there's harm between class around issues of healthcare. So there are places that where things are just again coming undone, let them fall away, right? And it gives us an opportunity to re-envision what church can be that is life-giving and life-affirming. I wanted to reference another quote from Frederick Douglass. He said, "I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ, which means I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial and hypocritical Christianity of this land. Indeed, I can see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity." And we're seeing this in what's happening with this takeover of the so-called evangelicals, or as I refer to them, the evangelicals, who have aligned themselves with the delusion and the God of white supremacy. We have to do away with that. That has to go. It has to go so that we can become what is life-giving, what is life-affirming, what is embracing of all of those who actually belong at the table of God, that belong in the kingdom of God. And let that be the new thing that is rising up as so many things are dying.
Amen. Well, Ms. Ann, truly you are taking us to this higher place in terms of giving us hope. And one of the things I want to end with, because there were quite a few questions that came, I want to kind of combine them into one. And that talks about hope, that talks about hope, because how I answer this question about, is this movement moment we're in, is it different? And particularly when you see European Americans marching and younger people marching during a pandemic, that says a lot. And so the question that has come up, and we got about 4 questions, I'm going to combine them into one, is about allyship. Because clearly we're in a place where you are being called to be courageous. to come out, to leave the old behind and embrace the new, and not to be afraid of that, as Ms. Ann just finished saying. And so what advice do you have for our audience panelists in terms of what are ways to create that allyship, either with the LGBT community or with the Black Lives Matter movement?
If I may, I have to run. There's a videotape happening. I want to say thank you. Thank you for being on this, welcoming me on this panel. It's an honor. I would always recommend that we create space, be intentional about that space, and saying with our mouths open and in various texts and telecommunication that all types of people are welcome in a particular space to address a particular question. And so if I am interested in allyship, I will say that, and I will be at places less comfortable for me because, again, as a gay man, I'm walking into spaces where I will, again, be the minority in that identity. So I would be as simple as that in an approach to be welcoming, asking, listening, and then implementing whatever we can agree upon, that we both say that this issue we would like to address. So with that, I want to say thank you. I have to get up on the screen.
That's okay. Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
Others, what advice do you have in terms of creating more allyship? Ms. Monica, you're muted, Reverend Monica.
Muted. Okay. You know, so as director of women's ministries here in Northern California, I have like 60 some churches in our region, and I have to visit those churches either through Zoom or physically. And when I go to Selma, California, they're not really feeling me all the time. But what I find is the more I engage, strategically engage, just don't go down there, strategically engage with the women in that space, then they turn out, okay, well, good. So I'm no longer an issue or a right-wing abomination. I'm a real person. And so being authentic in that space of difference can create some really interesting things. So several times women have come and told me, like, I just didn't know. You know, I get that from time to time where a lot of places I go. I went to, so I'm on Sundays, very busy, of course. So at the end of the day, I went to a store in my neighborhood, and I went there and the guy said, well, you sure look tired. I said, yeah, I'm a pastor. The look on his face was like, what? And we had a conversation about what that's like. But it takes time to build those relationships so that the people can be allies and eventually move into solidarity. But it takes a minute to do that.
Right.
The other part I'll share is I remember when I was at PSR, I went you know, when you go on that, what do you call it? Trip you gotta go on, at least at your second year.
The immersion.
Yeah. So I went to Appalachia for my immersion. And I found that the people in Appalachia suffer from the same stuff that my folks do in South Central Los Angeles. And the more we talked, the more like we realized, hey, wait a minute, we have similar issues. The challenge is that there have been intentional boundaries set so we can't have those conversations. So a lot of it is moving beyond the boundaries to have those conversations, because when a white person stars or a conservative person stars and I start, we all start. I think that's where the Poor People's Campaign comes in. Yeah. But it is about going beyond the boundaries and really building relationships. It's not easy, but it needs to be done.
I think that allies, for the most part, they can show up or they can be invited to the table. Being invited to the table and allowing them to speak to what they understand and to provide the kind of support that's needed in the different areas. But I don't necessarily think that, well, it's not that I don't think they can't, but they also, if there's an issue related to who's going to lead, or so they need to be invited to those positions, you know, in those areas to support the action steps. And through my experiences, I've always been very open and very welcoming, because we have not been able to fight this fight and achieve the, you know, even what has been achieved at this point in time, just on our own. So I welcome allies. Couldn't do it without them, but they not necessarily can they take the credit for the fight though, because it's ours, you know, and that's what I believe, you know, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. There are a couple of things that I would say. Again, I'm pulling a lot of quotes because there's wisdom in the things that our people have said beforehand. One quote by Ella Baker says that the power of imagination makes us infinite. So part of this time that we have in thinking about how we work with allies, how we understand new allies, has to do with what we can see, what we can envision. How can we, you know, because when you're in your mind, when you're in your imagination, where can't you go, right? That there are things that we can see that go beyond the limits of our finite sort of being. And so the visioning is so important to how we think about working with allies and how we move forward. And I would also reference, there's an article by another brilliant sister of mine named Makani Timba. She's written an article called Curing What Truly Ails Us, Reflections on Movement Strategy in a Time of Coronavirus. And if I can just share some of what she says, this speaks to me about, again, you know, how do we move beyond the fire this time that's in the streets and make it sustainable? She says this, she says, I love the fact that we are developing a collective global story, that we are meeting this challenge with kindness, consideration, and love. That's at the base of everything. We are asserting our interconnectedness in so many powerful ways, and this is a critical foundation for creating the world we are dreaming. When we're doing that, here are some things that we need to keep in mind. We need to study and learn from the past while not losing our ability to dream up the new. We need to integrate political education into everything that we do, whether we're in the church, the sanctuary, the school, the streets, in our homes. And we need to understand and develop strategies around building power, because working with allies is really about building power. We can't be afraid of that. We have to, one of the things that I love about the Poor People's Movement is that it's reaching out across and finding, like Reverend Monica said, what are the things that we have in common? Where are all of our lives at stake? Because people get involved in things when they can identify their own self-interest, right? That's a principle of community organizing. So how do we begin to stretch the vision of where our self-interest, where the self-interest of the planet rests? Like, if we have no planet, we have no life. So we have to look at this ecologically, politically, socially, economically, all of those kinds of ways. And as Sister Pamela said, you know, invite people to the table, make sure that everyone understands what their respective roles are, and keep at the center the people who may be most impacted, right, as the leaders, the builders and the drivers. So there's great possibility right now if we think with the wisdom of our ancestors and dream with the strength and the hopes of our younger generations as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Doug, would you like to respond to that, or do you have any closing thoughts that you have? We're at time, and so I want to make sure that we are respectful of people's time, but also want to give you some space as well.
I think what I've heard from the other panelists in the last 15 minutes is brilliant. I mean, that's sort of a how-to guide. I mean, I can't build anything on top of any of that. It's all fantastic. And I think, you know, in AA, you know, there are 12 steps, and there are guides to those steps in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and a book called The 12 and 12. And one of the steps deals with dealing with other people. And it says, we treat everyone with courtesy, justice, tolerance, and respect. Everyone. And, you know, I would love to live in a time when being a Black man or Black gay man is not a political statement, but it is. And because it is, it's my job to stand up and be present and be available and be visible. And if somebody can see me, they can get to know me. And if they get to know me, then hopefully I can make a friend. And if I make a friend, I'll make an ally. And that's it. But I'm really honored to have been part of all this. And the words of wisdom that have flowed from everybody's mouth have impacted me and taught me. And I really appreciate that. I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Well, amen, amen, amen. I just want to say thank you also to all of our panelists and for sharing your wisdom. And, you know, I got some good friends. And so bringing them together to have this national conversation. And again, thank you for your shout outs in the chat rooms. We got people from California, from, of course, here in Michigan, Texas, Tennessee, Ohio, Indiana. So again, I'm just very, very grateful for all of you who took the time to engage in this type of dialogue. It is so very necessary. And to make sure that, and I love what Reverend Ann said earlier, quoting Bishop Flunder, Yvette Flunder, about if we consider ourselves marginalized, then who's at our margins? And how is it that we can, it's not so much about trying to, get, a race to the center, but really is turn around and looking at each other. And how is it that we can truly give that helping hand? So when we have an ally who says, I may not identify like you, but I indeed want to make sure that your voice is valued. I recognize your common humanity and you matter, you're important to me. That's what this is all about. So again, thank you for all of our panelists and all of you participating. We at MCC Detroit, we like to do quite a few things, and because we are now more virtual than we ever have before, we would like to take our programming more national. And I just want to take a moment to mention trying to find space for young people, for children, to have a more progressive theology, and not to have the type of theology that has been harmful and creates spiritual violence, but having a more progressive theology. We at MCC Detroit, we're going to be having a vacation Bible school coming up that's going to be virtual. And I wanted to give that shout out to you all as well. You can visit us at mccdetroit.org. It's going to be the last week of August 24th. Forgive me, Hattie, she's going to kill me because she gave me the dates. It's the last full week of August. And why am I mentioning that? Is because, again, having this type of connection and having the world be a little bit smaller, that we don't have to keep all of our good things only in our neck of the woods. We can truly open it up and invite people to come and join us. But we're going to have other programs as well. So I invite you to sign up for our newsletters or to check us out, like I said, on our website or Facebook page. Be friends with us there. And again, we're just grateful for all of our panelists. Again, Reverend Ann Jefferson, Reverend Monica Joy Cross, Doug Spearman, Curtis Lipscomb, who had to go away, and of course, my sage, Pamela Alexander from the Ruth Ellis Center. And again, we're so very grateful for you all and your contributions. We're going to be clicking off soon, but thank you again and blessings to you in these ever-changing days.
Reverend Roland?
Thank you.
Yes. Could I make just one more announcement? I typed it in the chat.
Yes.
The Fellowship of Affirming Ministries is having a leadership conference beginning July 14th through the 16th. It's going to be our first ever virtual conference. You can go to Eventbrite, look it up. The registration's very affordable. There'll be dynamic speakers and topics. Our whole theme is co-creating with God. So there'll be makers, healers, artists, and activists, and theologians. Please come join us. Thank you for that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Hattie Alexander is from our church. I didn't get a chance to look at the chats. I don't know if there was any other key things that need to be happening. But again, forgive me if I step on your toes, but this is recorded and we'll put this up on MCC Detroit's YouTube page so you can connect with us and share this with other people as well. So thank you again for being with us all, and be blessed. Wash your hands, do the social distancing, wear your mask, and be kind to one another. Blessings to everyone.
Blessing. Thank you.